So here we have the Khan Academy's logically completing the text, aka inference questions. Only have 7 of them. These are the medium level questions. 8 questions. All of them have the same prompt, of course, logically completing the text. And so what we're going to do is read the passage and really try to formulate an approximate answer, as I call it, a simplified answer, so that we have some idea what we're looking for when it comes to sifting through the answer choices. And so I'm going to do this for each of the questions, hide the answer choices to begin with. So number 1, to investigate the history of plate subduction, that is, when one of Earth's tectonic plates slides beneath another, these researchers compared ancient rocks from this place in Canada to modern rocks. Okay, so we've got ancient and modern rocks. Okay, and they found that the rocks dating to about 4 billion years ago, that's pretty ancient, most strongly resemble modern rocks formed in a plume setting, that is, an area in which hot rocks form from Earth's mantle. Or form from Earth's mantle, flow upward. I think they're saying flow, or using flow as a noun here, upward into the crust. Okay, by contrast, they have found that rocks dating to about 3.75 and 3.6 billion years ago have an isotope composition that is similar to that of modern rocks formed in a subduction setting. Okay, so what could we conclude? And this is supposed to be a medium question. It doesn't seem so medium. It seems a little challenging here, but what do we have again? Okay, so I think the distinction between ancient and modern is not quite going to get us there. What we need to do instead is look at the ones 4 billion years ago, and those resemble modern rocks formed in a plume setting, whereas the ones found 3.75 to 3.6 billion years ago resemble ones found in a subduction setting. And so that suggests that something happened in between 4 billion years ago and 3.75 billion years ago. And what is that something? Well, perhaps a volcano eruption? Hot rocks flow upward into the crust? Let's see. I don't know, but let's see. Something happened in between 4 and 3.75 billion years ago. The majority? No. We don't know anything about how many of them, date back to 4 billion years ago versus 3.75 billion years ago. Subduction-like processes began occurring in some locations no later than 3.75 billion years ago. Now that makes sense. No later than. That means at least by that time. If I said be here no later than 8 o'clock, well, you could get there at 7:59 or 7:58 or 7:30, but you got to be there by 8. In this case, no later than 3.75 billion years ago. Yeah, by 3.75 billion years ago, this was happening. And so that should be our answer here. Yeah, it's not that they're of a more recent origin, because they've told us that they're 3.75 billion years ago. And this is an a bit of extreme wording, and that's definitely something to be wary of in general. We don't have any basis to make that inference. And again, keeping in mind that these are inference questions, extreme inferences are something you generally want to avoid. You want to make a conservative inference, relatively speaking, because that's going to be easier to support than an extreme one. We'll just get on to the next question. I won't go into a digression there. Okay, so number 2. Yep. So This biologist and colleagues analyzed the naturally occurring bacterial communities associated with leaves and roots of wild Arabidopsis thaliana, a small flowering plant. Okay, so we have a plant. So leaves and roots. Okay. The researchers found many of the same bacterial genera. And what is genera? That's the plural of genus, like genus and species. Genera in both the plant's leaves and the roots. To explain this, the researchers pointed to the general proximity or closeness of A. thaliana leaves to the ground, so these leaves are close to the ground, and noted that rain splashing off soil could bring soil-based bacteria in contact with the leaves. Alternatively, the researchers noted that wind, which may be a source of bacteria in the above-ground portion of the plants, could also bring bacteria to the soil and roots. Either explanation suggests that, and yeah, let's think about this, well, either what do these explanations have in common? Wind, rain. They're both environmental factors, play a role, as opposed to, the plant somehow producing the bacteria itself. I don't know. Is that, so yeah, something about environmental factors being responsible in each case. And I'll just remind you that I compiled these questions a while ago, several months ago. Haven't looked at them since. So this is basically feels like the first time I've done these. Okay. Doesn't say anything about being especially vulnerable to harmful bacteria. It doesn't say that one is less vulnerable or beneficial than the other. Many bacteria may have been deposited by means other than rain. Well, I don't know. I mean, it says that rain could be one of the means, and then this is another possibility. We don't know that one of them is necessarily the correct explanation. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 70-30, maybe it's 90-10, who knows? I don't think we want to pick C. D, some bacteria in these leaves and roots may share a common source. Yes. Okay. And that's not something I would have anticipated as an answer, but notice that, yeah, sometimes what we come up with as an approximate answer isn't exactly right, but we're still thinking, and we get to an answer choice like D, and we can say, okay, that makes sense. Why does that make sense? We go back and look at it, and it says here that the soil could bring, or the rain splashing off the soil could bring soil-based bacteria in contact with the leaves, meaning that there would be a common source, namely stuff that was already in the soil is now coming in contact with the leaves, so there's a common source. They're coming from the same place. And then alternatively, the wind could bring bacteria to the soil and roots. So the wind might blow bacteria onto the above ground portion, but also bring it back to the soil and roots. So either way, they may share a common source, whether that common source is the wind or the rain or the soil that the rain is splashing off of. And so D should be our answer on that one. Number 3. Archaeologists have been debating the origin of a rare form of lead found in Shang Dynasty bronze artifacts since its presence was discovered in China in the 1990s. Okay, since this rare form of lead's presence was discovered in the 1990s. Different researchers have proposed theories on which regions of the world would have had the raw materials containing the specific lead in these artifacts. Again, an artifact is just something made by humans. Okay, it could be tools, equipment, whatever, but no conclusive evidence has been presented. What is intriguing is that bronze artifacts from China dated after the Shang dynasty do not contain this form of lead, suggesting that, well, okay, so 1766 to 1046 BC, before Common Era or before Christ. So we're going from further back in time to not quite as far back in time. But anyway, we'll say, 1046 BC, when the Shang dynasty comes to an end, we've got lead and we've got no lead. I guess we could say unleaded, like gasoline. Well, what does this suggest? It suggests that, I don't know, there was, for some reason, they stopped using lead. And maybe they, I don't know. But I think we want to kind of keep in mind that dividing line, that there would be some reason why they stopped using lead or why they stopped finding lead in these artifacts. Bronze was used for a short time during the Shang dynasty before different metals were used. Well, we don't know about whether it was a short time or not, because, that dynasty lasted for 700 years, and we don't know anything about how long they were using different types of metals or whatever. B, Shang dynasty bronze pieces are rare and therefore more valuable. No, it doesn't say that. Nothing at all about the value. Methods used to analyze bronze artifacts are not useful on pieces that are dated after the Shang dynasty. I don't think that's necessarily true either, because those methods might reveal lead in certain cases and not reveal lead in other cases, but it doesn't mean that the methods themselves are not useful. The source of some of the raw materials used to make bronze was exploited or made use of only until the end of the Shang dynasty. Well, yeah, so here's an example of where I didn't even write anything down as an approximate answer. It didn't have anything that really came to mind or jumped to mind, but thinking about that dividing line and what I came up with, it wasn't great. There's some reason they stopped using lead, but it connects us to our answer anyway. And so I think maybe the moral of the story here is, don't feel like you have to come up with the greatest, simple or approximate answer. Sometimes it can be really approximate and still lead you to the correct answer, as I think it has done here. Okay, some of the raw materials, meaning those raw materials containing lead. Booker T. Whatley, an agricultural professor and researcher at Tuskegee University, developed the concept of the U-Pick farm, where customers harvest their own produce directly from the farm. His concept revolutionized the way small farms could do business, as it allowed them to limit labor expenses, cut out the middleman, and sell their produce directly to the public. Some critics argued that the U-Pick farm does not benefit small farms as much as he claimed it would, as it requires the farms to invest in marketing and infrastructure to attract customers. And infrastructure is a good vocabulary word to know. It's just sort of stuff that needs to be in place. For a city, infrastructure is things like roads, railroad tracks, plumbing, water pipes, electrical lines, etc. In this case, I'm not sure what it means beyond marketing, signs, advertisements, I don't know, whatever it is. However, supporters of the U-Pick farm argue that these downsides are outweighed by the benefit of, these are the downsides. What are the downsides? Requiring farms to invest in marketing and infrastructure. Those are the downsides. But if those are outweighed by the benefits, Well, what are the benefits? Lower labor expenses and the ability to sell directly to the public. So the middleman would be like, they sell to some wholesaler who then sells to the grocery store or something. So each one in that, each one of them takes a cut. And so that would cut down on the original, farm's profits. And so if they cut out the middleman, even if they do have to invest in marketing and infrastructure, they could still save money. So if the supporters argue that these downsides are outweighed by the benefit of, something up here, reduced labor expenses. Well, A looks pretty good. Labor expenses, reducing reliance on hired labor. B, it does not say anything at all about growing one type or, for that matter, multiple types of produce. Allowing them to sell their produce in bulk. Again, we had to focus on what there is evidence of. Requiring their farms to transport their product to them. No, that would be the opposite. This method does not require that because it allows them to cut out the middleman and sell directly to the public. And so limit labor expenses, reduce the reliance of small farms on hired labor. Number 5. In her 2021 article, Throw Away History Towards a Historiography of Ephemera. And that's a good word to know. Perhaps more common would be the adjective ephemeral. That means something that is like fleeting, short-lived, intangible. It's here and then it's gone. Maybe like a scent of perfume or a musical performance. You hear it and then it's gone. You smell it and then it's gone. Okay. But it can also mean, as it's going to mean here, it could mean, like, as it says here, items to be discarded. So bus tickets, campaign pamphlets, ticket stubs, receipts, etc. So things that are meant to be, discarded or short-lived. So ephemera, the noun there. Okay, so this person collected these items intended to be discarded. She recognized that scholarly institutions, schools, museums, maybe, considered his expansive collection of ephemera to be worthless. Indeed, it wasn't until 1968 that Oxford University acquired the collection, having grasped the item's potential value to historians and other researchers. Hence, the example of Johnson serves to, what is it doing? I think show that that it's hard to articulate this. To basically show that it's not always easy to predict what people will value later on, or even just to show that, ephemera can wind up being valuable, if not necessarily from a monetary perspective, valuable to researchers. Something like that. And we'll see how close that gets us to the correct answer. So this example serves to represent the challenge of incorporating No, it doesn't represent the challenge. It's really more about whether those institutions find it of value. That looks good. They can wind up being valuable or considered valuable, the later recognition of their utility. And I'd say utility is a better word than value, usefulness. Whereas value, again, suggests that you'd have to pay a lot of money for it. But, again, it's an approximate answer. We don't have to come up with the exact right word. But I think that's going to be correct. We've got an extreme answer here. Arguments that it holds no value, and no, it would do the opposite. It holds, some value, at least. Okay, and demonstrate the difficulties. Nope, it's not saying how difficult things would be without it. It's just saying that they do see some value in having it. And so, approximate answers lead you to actual correct answers. In their book, Smart Pricing, these people consider musicians' use of the traditional pay-as-you-wish model. This model generally offers listeners the choice to pay more or less than a suggested price for a song or album, or even pay nothing at all. As the authors note, that's the option most listeners chose for an album by the band Harvey Danger. Only about 1% opted to pay for the album, resulting in earnings below the band's expectation. But the authors also discussed musician Jane Seabury, who saw significant earnings from her pay-as-you-wish online music store as a result of many listeners choosing to pay more than the store's suggested prices. Hence, the pay-as-you-wish model may vary in its successfulness depending on the performer or maybe the genre. In other words, just with these two examples, it would be hard to draw a sweeping conclusion given that one example, it looks like their fans are kind of cheap. In this case, her fans are generous. So, no. I mean, if anything, that's the band and that's the individual musician. I don't think we could necessarily even conclude the opposite, but we certainly don't want to conclude that because it's contradicted by the evidence. Cause most musicians who use the model to doesn't say anything about the suggested price. Doesn't say anything about lowering or, for that matter, raising the suggested price. It's really more about variation in what customers pay relative to the suggested price. It may prove financially successful for some musicians, but disappointing for others. It may vary depending on performer. More strongly reflect differences in certain musicians' popularity. Well, they don't say anything about the popularity of one versus the other. I think Harvey Danger had one hit in the 90s. I don't know much about Jane Seabury, but in any event, that doesn't matter. They're not expecting us to know about them. They don't say anything about popularity, and so we don't want to use that. So yeah, it can be successful for some, but not for others. Dutch painters in the 16th and 17th centuries often showed tables filled with large wheels of cheese or carved shards of butter. Some art historians, noting that dairy products were a major component of the Dutch diet, interpret these decisions as reflections of everyday Dutch eating habits. So what these painters painted reflected what people ate on a day-to-day basis, a lot of dairy. However, a group of researchers recently reviewed hundreds of food-related paintings and found that lemons, which could only be acquired in the Netherlands at great cost since they had to be imported from warmer climates, feature in Dutch paintings of the period more than 3 times as frequently as dairy products do. Okay, so if something that would have been less common or less accessible, namely lemons, appears more frequently in the paintings than dairy products, I think that would cast doubt on the idea that there is a correlation. I might misspell this. Well, let's see. Correlate. I think it's that. Usually a pretty good speller, but anyway, it casts doubt on the idea that there's a correlation between, I'm just going to say paintings and everyday life, but what I mean by that is how frequently a certain food item appears in a painting relative to how frequently it is eaten, or how much it is a part of people's everyday diet. Okay, but again, if you're making notes for yourself, you don't have to make them grammatical or anything like that. It just needs to kind of get it down enough so that you have thought. The process of thinking about it is what's important, not what you write down. Okay, So they may have depicted foods for symbolic reasons rather than to show what they typically ate. I mean, possibly, but I think we want to be careful here. It doesn't actually say anything about symbolism. And so that would be an example of, I'd say, something that's a little bit of a guess or an assumption, at least in terms of that part. Even though that part looks good, because they're, probably not showing what they typically ate. But I would definitely say we want to look at the others before we pick A. B, no. I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to figure out. Do the paintings tell us what was a significant component of their diet or not? Depictions of the period should be taken as realistic representations. I would say not. No, it would be the other way around. They shouldn't be taken as realistic representations. Again, given that a certain food item that was not that easily accessible appeared very frequently. And then D, food was a more popular subject. We don't know anything about Dutch painters compared to painters from other countries. So even though I was initially skeptical about A, wait a second. It's casting doubt on the idea. Okay, casting doubt on the idea. So let me come back. It's going to cast doubt on the idea that the depictions should be taken as realistic representations. Yes, it would maybe support this. So here's you saw me almost miss this one. So let this be a reminder to be, to stay aware of what it's, in this case, casting doubt. That's kind of a negative. We're casting doubt on it, on an idea. So it's not asking what this supports. It asks what it casts doubt on. Yes. And so C will be correct. But again, that brings it back to the part about symbolic reasons. It doesn't talk about symbolism one way or the other. And then the last one here. Songbirds learn to respond to and imitate their species' songs from an early age. With each generation, small differences are introduced that result in distinct variations called dialects among geographically isolated populations of the same species. So maybe you've got an island over here and an island over there and an island over there. So we have birds of the same species, but they have slightly different songs. And I guess if you're talking about birds, they might not be that isolated, but let's suppose the islands are far enough apart that the birds are not just going from one to the other. Okay, so a research study examined whether 12-day-old bird nestlings, what is a nestling? Like little baby birds. Usually when you see an L-I-N-G, it means something small, like a duckling, etc. So whether they prefer local dialects over the unfamiliar dialects of birds from other populations. So, for example, does a bird from here prefer the sounds that they hear here versus the ones that might hear from birds coming from this island or that other island? They found that nestlings produced more becking calls in response to their own dialect than to non-local dialect. Okay, so that would mean they preferred the local one to the non-local one. Since song preference plays a role in songbird mate selection, the findings suggest that birds prefer mates with similar songs, basically. It's almost like, in people, maybe, people have the same taste in music. They might be more likely to hit it off than people who have totally different taste in music. Kind of maybe the same idea, in a sense. So, yep. So, ugh, no, it's not. It's not talking about. They're not going to be mating with birds of other species. It's talking about how they react to the, these are different not different populations. These are different, different populations of the same species. Still the same species, but not different species. And honestly, you're not going to have like a duck mate with a goose, or a bluebird mate with a crow. They need to be made. In order to mate, it needs to be the same species. Okay. B, these nestlings prefer their own dialect, or it likely drive them when they mature to reproduce with other from local rather than. Well, that makes sense. They prefer mates with similar songs. Their preference for their own dialect likely drives them to reproduce with ones from local. Yeah, that seems good. C, no. We got to keep in mind the prompt. Since songbird preference plays a role in songbird mate selection, our conclusion needs to have something to do with mate selection. And that contradicts it. Why would you say that? I know they have to come up with wrong answers, but no, it would do the opposite of promoting socialization between different populations. It would reinforce the connections within a population. And so answer to this one should be B.